My name is Claire Matthews. I'm 33 years old, and at 2 a.m., my husband drove a screwdriver into my shoulder while his parents laughed. The world stopped in that moment. I could smell the iron in my blood, feel the warmth spreading beneath my palm, hear the sound of my own disbelief turning into their twisted amusement. My trembling hand somehow found the strength to hit send on an SOS message before everything went black. Fast forward to a courtroom months later. A judge lifts a sealed federal report. No one breathes. His parents, once so smug and confident, now look hollow, empty, broken. But before I tell you how I turned my silence into the loudest form of justice, hit that subscribe button and tell me where you're watching from in the comments below. I need to know I'm not the only one who's had to let truth speak louder than love. From the outside, we were the perfect couple that everyone envied. The successful doctor husband with his graceful, educated wife. His charming parents who threw these elaborate dinner parties where everything looked absolutely flawless. People would look at us and think we had it all figured out. They saw the smiles, the coordinated outfits, the way he'd put his hand on my lower back when we walked into rooms together. But perfection, I learned, is always curated. Behind those closed doors, my world had become nothing but soft apologies and sharp, cutting silences. Every joke made at my expense would end with that familiar phrase, "Oh, Claire, don't be so dramatic." Every insult was carefully disguised as love, wrapped up in concern, delivered with a smile that made me question my own reality. His parents absolutely adored their son. He was polished, charming, successful in every way that mattered to them, and they tolerated me like I was just another accessory in his perfect life. Something pretty to display, but not really worth listening to. I thought that's what love looked like. I thought love meant endless patience, constant understanding, always being the bigger person. But that patience had slowly made me invisible, even to myself. Over the years, that word became my prison. Dramatic. When I was exhausted from working 12-hour shifts and still coming home to cook dinner, dramatic. When I cried after his mother made another cutting comment about my career choices, dramatic. When I achieved a promotion and wanted to celebrate, dramatic for seeking recognition. My world kept shrinking until it became nothing but quiet obedience. I stopped arguing because it was pointless. I stopped explaining myself because no one was listening anyway. I stopped fighting back because every time I did, I was told I was overreacting, being too sensitive, making mountains out of molehills. And his mother's gentle, satisfied smile every time I stayed silent said everything I needed to know. Good girl. That's what that smile meant. Good girl for not making waves. Good girl for not embarrassing the family. Good girl for knowing your place. But peace without truth isn't really peace at all. It's paralysis. It's slowly dying while everyone around you congratulates themselves on how peaceful everything has become. The night everything changed started like so many others. It was late, past 2 a.m. The air was thick with the smell of whiskey and something else I couldn't quite name. Maybe it was the scent of years of accumulated resentment finally boiling over. I heard a crash echoing from the kitchen, the sound of something expensive hitting the floor and shattering. Ethan was standing there when I found him, his eyes glassy and unfocused, but his anger was sharp, focused, laser precise. His parents were visiting for the weekend, staying in our guest room, and I could hear them stirring upstairs from the noise. "You think you're better than me now?" he sneered, his words slurring together, but the venom in them crystal clear. The promotion I'd gotten the week before hung between us like an accusation. I whispered back, trying to keep my voice calm, trying not to wake his parents. "You've had too much to drink. Please, just go to bed." He smiled then, that cold, calculating smile I'd seen too many times before. "You're so dramatic, Claire." I watched his hand move toward the kitchen drawer, heard the scrape of metal against wood as he pulled it open. Time seemed to slow down as his fingers closed around the handle of a screwdriver. The next second, there was searing, white-hot pain shooting through my shoulder as the metal drove deep into my flesh. I fell to the floor, my hand instinctively pressing against the wound as blood began spreading warm and sticky beneath my palm. And then I heard it, laughter echoing from the doorway. His parents had come downstairs to see what the commotion was about, and they were actually laughing. "Oh, Claire, for heaven's sake," his mother said in that same tone she used when I spilled wine on her tablecloth. "You probably just tripped and fell onto the toolbox. You always were so clumsy." That's when everything went dark. Before you hear what happened next, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, drop a comment, and let me know what country you're watching from. Your support means everything to me right now. When I finally woke up, the world had turned sterile and white. Hospital walls, hospital smells, that particular kind of artificial lighting that makes everything look surreal. My mother-in-law was sitting primly in the chair beside my bed, her hands folded in her lap like she was at a church service. "You gave us such a scare," she said sweetly, her voice dripping with false concern. "The doctor said you fell onto the toolbox in the garage. Ethan feels absolutely awful about leaving his tools scattered around like that." My husband nodded from the corner of the room, his face perfectly rehearsed, his voice trembling right on cue. "You know I'd never hurt you, right?" he said, reaching for my hand. "This is all just a terrible accident. We love you so much, Claire." I said nothing, but inside something had finally snapped, not broken, snapped into place, like a puzzle piece finding exactly where it belonged. They stayed for a while, taking turns telling me their version of what had happened. How I'd been drinking too much lately, how I'd been so stressed with work, how I'd gotten up in the middle of the night, disoriented, and stumbled into the garage where Ethan had carelessly left his tools spread out on the workbench. Their story was detailed, consistent, believable. They'd clearly spent time working out all the kinks while I was unconscious. Finally, I asked for a moment alone. I told them I needed to rest, that I was feeling overwhelmed. They left, visibly relieved that I seemed compliant, that I wasn't asking difficult questions or making any of those dramatic scenes they were always worried about. The door clicked shut behind them, and for the first time in years, I was truly alone with my thoughts. My hand reached for my phone on the bedside table, and when I spoke, my voice didn't shake. "This is Senior Analyst Claire Matthews, badge number 47291, activating Federal Duress Protocol, code 0203, assault on a federal employee with attempted cover-up." You see, what my husband and his family never bothered to learn about me, what they never thought was important enough to remember, was that I worked for the Department of Homeland Security. I was a threat assessment analyst with federal law enforcement credentials. And we have protocols for exactly these kinds of situations. My silence, which they had mistaken for weakness, had just become the most powerful weapon I'd ever wielded. The system moved faster than I ever expected it to. My SOS message had triggered an automatic wellness check. Paramedics had found me on the kitchen floor with what the medical report would later classify as penetrating trauma consistent with deliberate assault. They had documented everything: the forensic evidence, his blood alcohol level, weapon traces, the suspicious delay in calling for medical assistance. His parents' carefully crafted version of events was already unraveling before they even knew there was a case being built against them. This wasn't going to be a family matter handled quietly behind closed doors. This was now a federal investigation into the assault of a government employee. While they thought they were managing a clumsy wife's embarrassing accident, federal agents were photographing evidence, interviewing witnesses, and building a case that would destroy their perfect family narrative forever. Months later, I found myself sitting in a federal courtroom, watching Ethan's lawyer smile with the kind of easy confidence that comes from never having been challenged. The man actually had the audacity to stand up in front of a federal judge and say, "Your Honor, this was clearly a misunderstanding between spouses. My client's wife has a well-documented tendency to dramatize situations. Even his parents will testify to her theatrical nature." There was that word again. Dramatize. Theatrical. The same labels they'd been using to silence me for years, now being used in a court of law to justify attempted murder. I felt my scar throb under my sleeve, a physical reminder of just how real their misunderstanding had been. But then my attorney stood up. She was calm, precise, deadly in her professionalism. "Your Honor, the prosecution requests entry of federal case file 7749 Delta, a duress activation report filed under Homeland Security Protocol 0203. The judge opened the sealed file that had been sitting on his desk. I watched his face as he read, curiosity shifting to disbelief, then hardening into something that looked a lot like controlled fury. This report confirms a federal duress activation filed at 2:03 hours by senior analyst Claire Matthews. Paramedics responding to the automated alert located Mrs. Matthews with a screwdriver wound requiring surgical intervention. Mr. Matthews' blood alcohol level at the time of arrest was 0.17, more than twice the legal limit. His parents were present and made statements contradicting physical evidence. "Counselor, do you wish to amend your client's plea?" The silence in that courtroom was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop. His mother's lips were trembling, her perfect composure finally cracking. His father was staring down at his hands like they held the answers to questions he'd never thought to ask, and the man who had once mocked me, who had driven metal into my flesh while his parents laughed, suddenly had nothing to say. The judge's voice softened slightly as he looked directly at me. "Mrs. Matthews, it appears that the same analytical precision that has served our country so well in your professional capacity may have saved your life. The court finds the defendant guilty on all charges." The gavel came down like thunder. Verdict delivered. Justice served. And finally, the silence they had tried to force on me had become their burden to carry. I want you to pause right here and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Because what happened next changed everything, and I need to know there are people out there who understand why this moment mattered so much. Outside the courthouse, the air felt sharp and clean in a way I hadn't experienced in years. My shoulder was aching. It always did when the weather changed. But somehow that pain felt like proof. Proof that I had survived. Proof that the truth had weight, had consequences, had power. My attorney walked beside me, her heels clicking confidently on the concrete steps. "You won," she whispered, like she was sharing a secret. But I shook my head. "I wasn't trying to win," I told her. "I was trying to be believed." Behind us, I heard his mother's voice calling out, desperate and broken. "Claire, please, we can talk about this. We're family." I didn't turn around. Some silences I had learned were sacred. Some bridges were meant to be burned. Some relationships were meant to end in courtrooms with gavels and federal sentencing guidelines. The truth hadn't just silenced them. It had freed me to finally use my own voice. 1 year later, I'm sitting in my new office. The morning sunlight streams through floor-to-ceiling windows, and on my door, a nameplate reads, "Claire Matthews, Team Lead, Threat Analysis Division." It's a promotion I earned, a position I deserved, a title no one can take away from me or diminish with their casual cruelty. There's a faint scar on my shoulder that serves as a reminder, but not of victimhood. It reminds me of strength. It reminds me that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to let other people's version of your story become your reality. My new team surrounds me now. Colleagues who listen when I speak, who value my expertise, who never once have called me dramatic for having opinions or emotions, or the audacity to take up space in the world. This is the family I chose, the family I earned, the family that sees me as I actually am instead of who they need me to be. An email notification blinks on my computer screen. The sender's name makes my stomach tighten for just a moment. "We're sorry. Can we talk? Please?" I don't open it. I don't read the details. I don't wonder what they want or whether they've learned anything or if they're finally ready to acknowledge what really happened that night. Instead, I archive it, delete it, move on with my day. Because the truth didn't just silence them, it taught me that my voice was worth protecting, that my story was worth telling. That dramatic was never the right word for someone who refused to disappear quietly. If you've ever had to turn your pain into power, if you've ever had to let truth speak louder than love, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Share your story if you're ready. Because silence doesn't mean weakness. Sometimes it's just the sound of strength taking shape, gathering force, preparing to change everything. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to stay quiet when staying quiet means letting lies win. Sometimes being called dramatic is just proof that you're the only one in the room telling the truth. And sometimes, the people who try to silence you end up learning that silence works both ways. The truth will set you free, but first, it will probably get you called dramatic. Let them call you whatever they want. The truth doesn't care about their comfort. Neither should you.